Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Gretchen Rowe, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to this roundtable discussing what mastery is. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to spend the next hour with you with two of my esteemed colleagues, Michael Sauce and Kathleen Calabrese, and they will introduce themselves momentarily. I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves, and ladies first, Kathleen, if you will be so kind. I should say my name is Gretchen Rowe. I live in Western North Carolina. My husband and I are the homeschooling parents of 6. 5 are now college graduates, and the caboose in our train is a junior in high school. We've done it all. We've done public school, private school, parochial school, homeschool, and it's all been a wild adventure. And I hope you have as much joy in the journey as we did. And now let me welcome Kathleen. Kathleen?
Hi, my name is Kathleen Calabrese. I am a customer service representative with Demme Learning. I have been using Math-U-See for 20 years in my home. I homeschool. I have 2 boys. One is already graduated, and my youngest is a senior. And they have used all levels of Math-U-See. My youngest has used several levels of Spelling-U-See, and we just absolutely love it. So perfect for us.
Michael?
Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you for joining us, first of all. My name is Michael Sauce. I've worked with homeschoolers with Demme Learning for the past 7 years. I've been working with homeschoolers in general since 2005, so I'm on year 16. Really enjoy speaking to all of you and hearing your journeys and getting to know you and your children. And I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old of my own. And just excited to be here today with you and talk about this wonderful topic of mastery. So,
I remember well when Michael became a dad, and now he says he has an 8-year-old, and it's like, where did the time go? It's happened so quickly. So I should say that my eldest is 35, and I'm the grandma of 3. So kids grow up way too quickly, and it's our pleasure today to talk about something that is a foundational principle of Math-U-See. And understanding what mastery means and being able to apply mastery in your homeschool will carry far beyond the implications for mathematics for you. If you can figure out the methodology to ascertain mastery for your children, you can apply that to any subject that they are learning. And that is a skill set that they'll be able to carry with them all the way through their college years. So we have lots of things to talk about today. Many of you have given us questions. We have some things that we want to share with you, but then we're going to open the floor to questions. So we have about 15 minutes worth of explanation of what mastery looks like, what we think it is, what we think it should be at its finest. But let's begin a little bit with the explanation of the teach back. And Kathleen, since you have used Math-U-See in your own household, can you explain for our viewers what the teach back should look like and what that would be? And maybe even I'll go so far as to say what the teach back would look like with a younger student versus an older student. So.
Sure. Okay, so the teach back, what we want to be able to see is that they understand the concept, not just that they can come up with the answer, but they understand how and why they came up with the answer. And the best way to do that is using the build, write, say method. That are they able to take that equation and build it? Can they write it out? And can they verbally say what it is? And a younger child may need a little assistance. They may need you to ask questions to kind of pull that out of them a little bit. But as they get a little bit older, they should be able to go through that problem and show you the steps of it. And that does demonstrate that they understand how did they come up with an 8 for 3 plus 5, not just, well, I know it's 8. Okay, we need more than it's 8. So them explaining to you how they take 3 blocks and they take the 5, and when they put them together, it's the same as the 8 block. Them explaining that and being able to write it, that shows that they really understand it.
Michael, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it's like to do this with your younger, maybe either one of the boys, because I know you've explained this in both guises, and how the manipulatives themselves make the explanation for them easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I have two very different boys. They both learn very differently. And so what I expect of them when they teach it back to me is very different. My 8-year-old obviously has a larger vocabulary than the 5-year-old, and their understanding is different. And so we take that into account. I think the number one thing is they're never allowed to teach it back to me until the next morning. We want to make sure it's not fresh in their mind. So they're going to practice that day, but they're not going to teach it back until the next morning because we want to make sure it's sticking and it's not something fresh in their mind. So with them, if they can be able to show me, like Kathleen said, with the building with the blocks, with the writing it down and verbalizing it to me, I need to know that they understand it well enough. The great thing is the review pages that come afterwards are a great catch-all. You're going to find out, okay, we're going to take the blocks away when we're reviewing. And if they're struggling there, we're going to pause again and make sure we go over it again, because the review pages are there to maintain mastery, while the practice pages are there to gain mastery. And so as an instructor, my job there is really my goal is actually to help them learn the material well enough that they can move on to the review pages, and then in the review pages that they still remember what they did from previous lessons. And so keep that in mind. You're the parent, you know your kids well enough to know when they're getting and when they need a little bit extra help. My goal is on the second day, if they still don't have it down, is to give them that little help, saying, okay, it looks like we're struggling with this step. Let's talk about that step today. And if we can get that down, I think tomorrow we'll be able to move on. And so it's just giving them that guidance of how to understand that concept, or memorizing that fact for that matter. So,
Kathleen, could you talk a little bit about what it's like to have to encourage an older student to still demonstrate with the manipulatives when they have reached the age where they think these are for little kids?
Sure, and I went through that firsthand. I had with my oldest son, even though I used Matthew C from the start, I would say that I didn't understand what mastery meant. I was going more based off of what I knew growing up. So for my oldest child, I gave him every single worksheet of every single lesson of every single book, and he was very compliant and he did them. And if he got one wrong, he went back and he did it again. And I thought that mastery was making sure he had 100% on his worksheets. At the time, that's what I thought it was. He did get to a point with me that I started looking at his problems, and I said, well, this one is, you didn't show your work. You didn't do any of that. And he said, but I know the answer. And that's when I realized, because then I started saying to him, well, how do you know the answer? And he did then have to start showing me how he came up with the answer. So he didn't show his work, but he did then use the blocks and be able to verbally tell me how he came up with the answer. So then I said, okay. So even though he wasn't writing it out on the worksheet and he just knew that the answer was 63 or whatever, I knew that he understood it because he was able to show me.
Okay, that's a good explanation. Being able to use the materials. We have a colleague who often says that you can't move on to the review pages until you can demonstrate with the manipulatives. And Michael brought up a really important point, not the same day. Why would we say that? Well, the truth of the matter is there's a difference between short-term understanding and long-term understanding. What we want is the long-term understanding. But sometimes if we don't allow that sleep on it element, we don't get that long-term understanding. And it becomes a different experience. Many of us have had the experience of learning how to do something and being able to do it in the moment, but then you step away and you sleep and you come back and you're not quite as sure as you were before. So that surety comes from allowing that 24 hours there of step away progress. Michael, I know you talked about when we were planning for this roundtable, the prove it page. Can you explain that? Because I think that's a really important idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. I want to make one more point before jumping into that. One of the things, my youngest is not the most compliant child in the world, to say that nicely, but he loves pretend. And so on the teach back day, he is the teacher and I am the student. And he gets to teach me what he's learned. So he gets to pretend to be the teacher with his marker board, and he gets the blocks, and I sit in the desk or by the table and he shows me what he's learned. And so there's something there to be able to make it more fun and interactive, and not just be like, okay, teach it back to me. Okay, you got it, let's move on. It's more of a fun educational time for him where he's able to really dress up, and he's really able to make this into a playtime in a lot of ways. And so you can make this a lot of fun and not just be part of the, I don't know, curriculum structure, I should say. And so now jumping into what Gretchen was saying about the prove it page, one of the things you're going to find is placement isn't always so nice and tidy, where you're able to just jump in a book, and that's the first lesson that's shown is the first lesson we left off on. There's always some overlap. No matter what curriculum you switch to, there's going to be some overlap. And so if you know they know it, I still recommend watching the video together, learning how the blocks are used, and then doing the first page. And that's what I call a prove it page. Prove to me you know it, because sometimes my kids surprise me with what they know, and sometimes they surprise me with what they don't know. And so this is just a checklist for me to know they got it. I can move on. So at that point, I'm just going to do that first page. They nailed it. We'll go to the review pages tomorrow and work on those the next day. And so this is just kind of a quick check. You know, even if you want to just do a few of the problems, okay, because your son or your daughter is saying, I know this, Mom, I know I got it. Okay, just do the first 3 or 4 for me. Show me you got it. We'll do a word problem in there, make sure we have it, and we'll move on to the to the review pages. So do what you have to do to know your child, and don't let the curriculum dictate it. Use the curriculum as a tool to move on properly through the level. So
I think that's a very wise statement, is using the curriculum as a tool. Michael, I wonder if I could digress for a hot minute, because I think you're such a terrific dad who's so well engaged with his sons. I wonder if you could talk about how you use your youngest son's brief attention span, and how you keep that focused with Duplos to help him know how to stay on task and how long it should take.
Yeah, my son has a really tough time sitting and listening, which is normal for a 5-year-old, and I get that. But it seems like it's a little more aggressive than most kids. And so what we do is we have Duplos that we set by him, because most of our lessons for a 5-year-old aren't going to last more than 10, 15 minutes at the absolute most. And so I put out 5 Duplos to record for 10 minutes. And I tell him when I take one away, it means we're down to about 8 minutes left, because he obviously, as a 5-year-old, doesn't have a concept of time. And so this is my visual clock for him. And so I will show him, I'll take one up, I'll pick it up, and I'll say, we have 4 left, buddy. Okay, you're doing great, 4 left. And let's keep going. And then he keeps going, and pretty soon we'll take out another one. We got 3 left. We got three Duplos left. When they're all done, he's done. And so he knows that this is, this is all it's going to take. And if I do well here, then there might be something where he gets to play for 10 minutes or something like that afterwards. But it gives him the idea that he knows how long it's going to take, and it's not this weird notion of whenever Mom or Dad tells me I'm done. So it helps him know where he's at.
And I think that is really a great way to visualize for a child who does not have a firm concept of how long something takes, to know that time is not interminable, that it is winding down. I was doing a task last week that I really didn't enjoy, and I remembered your Duplos. I thought maybe I need Duplos to keep me hanging in here until I get this task done. Kathleen, I know that you had mentioned in our conversation last week about trusting the process. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, particularly when we as parents didn't learn with this kind of methodology. How do we trust that the process works?
Right. I think that most of that comes with understanding that we're all individuals and we all learn differently. My boys are 8 years apart. So I was already schooling my oldest for a few years, and I had all my curriculum picked out and I had everything. And then by the time my youngest was ready for school, what I had picked out didn't work for him at all. He was a completely different child, and he learned differently. He learned very differently. That was a huge indicator for me to trust the process of using, picking out a certain curriculum. And even though these two boys learned differently, Matthew C. worked wonderfully for both of them, because they I guess you could say they went into it differently. They learned from it differently. They both learned alpha, beta, gamma, delta, but not the same, definitely not the same way. My oldest son was much more that he watched the video and he would do the worksheets, and he didn't really ask a lot of questions, but he knew, he was very quick with it, and he knew. With my youngest son, he loved the videos, always said Mr. Demme was his teacher, not mom, which I was always okay with. But he learned differently. We had to do more abstract things with him. I couldn't just give him worksheets. It had to be more about playing games and asking questions, and he learned it differently. And that really taught me that the method works, but you just have to trust it, because not every child is going to pull the exact same thing out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that is very wise counsel in any kind of situation. I made a promise to you all at the beginning. I said that if you understand the concept of mastery and how mastery should work, you can apply it to other things. So before we really move on into questions and some observations and things like that, I want to have you take this and understand this in a larger concept. If we are using as the rubric of mastery the explanation process, let me explain to you why I know that what I'm doing works. That's the applicative flow, if you will, for other disciplines. It can be that way in science. It can be that way in reading. One of the things that a parent said to me about 6 months ago, which really affected me, and I've thought of several times since then, is she was talking about her child struggling with reading comprehension questions. And that they would read a passage and then they would come to the reading comprehension questions, and she would find that the child had not attended well to the reading so that they could answer the comprehension questions. And I said, well, do you review the comprehension questions ahead of time before you and your student read the passage? And she said, well, isn't that kind of like cheating? And I said, no, not at all. You're framing for your child what they need to look for in the same way that you're framing for your child mathematically what your expectations are when they do the teach back using the manipulatives. You're framing for them what they need to look for. And so that allows you to take mastery beyond the world of mathematics and move it into other elements as well. One of the things that the three of us talked about last week was the teach back in spelling, you see. And Michael, I know that you had talked about this, about the dictation being just another task. I wondered if you could elaborate on that a little bit, because I think your observation was really terrific.
Sure. A lot of us in spelling, we remember getting word lists and working on that word list all week long until we got our test on Friday. And what happens a lot of times is we may do really well through the week and get to the test and freeze and not do as well because we get test anxiety. Secondly, thing that can happen is we do really well all week and we memorize that list and we nail it because we're good test takers and we just memorize that list and then our brain throws it out. Well, our goal of spelling, you see, is really to help build a long-term visual memory for the words. And every activity helps us get to that point. And so the copy work and the chunking that we do all week long are ways to basically take it from one step of breaking it down to bite-sized chunks to writing it out with the words right on top of it, to the dictation being taking it from memory. However, in this case, it's not a test. It's a conversation with you and your child. And so you're going to sit right beside your child and give them one word at a time, giving them the capital letters and the punctuation. We're not looking for them to memorize a part of a passage or a part of a phrase. We want just that one word. And if they struggle with that word, we want help. To give a quick story, I remember when I was young and I was sitting by my dad. I remember this exact moment I asked him, how do you spell the word why? And he looked at me and said, you know, buddy, that's a tough word. It's actually spelled W-H-Y. And I never forgot how to spell that word again. It stuck with me because this is another way to teach your child that word. Because the goal of spelling UC goes beyond spelling that passage well at the dinner table. It can go beyond that to wanting them to be able to know to spell the English language and teaching them what to look for all words. And so this is another way to kind of teach them what to look for and how words are spelled. And so keep that in mind. It's not a test. That's why at the bottom of the page, you're going to see how many words did you spell correctly, not how many words did you miss. We're not interested in that. We're only looking at how many words are spelled correct. Even the ones that you helped them with can be counted in that. So,
you know, one of the things that several parents inquired about in the process of registering for this was the kids really struggle with word problems. And we did a whole roundtable about word problems. But in the context of being able to help kids achieve mastery, I think it's important for us to have a brief conversation about word problem and about how to address word problems. And Kathleen, I know as a customer service representative, you talk parents through this on the regular. Can you just give a brief thumbnail for parents of what we as parents can do to help our kids tackle word problems and do that successfully?
Sure. For word problems, what has worked for me and what I suggest is that you highlight the words that they're looking for, that help them to know what they need to do. Do they need to add, subtract? What do I need to do first? I try to do it as a parent. I try to do it first by reading the word problem, and then I ask my child if they know what they need to do. If they're not sure, if they don't, I'll read the problem again, and I put emphasis, verbal emphasis on the words that I know are cues to them to what they need to do. And then I'll continue to ask more questions. Well, and usually I try to work backwards. Well, what are we trying to figure out here? And my son will say, well, we're trying to figure out how many apples each student gets. Okay, great. So if you're trying to figure out how many apples, then what would you need to do? Well, you're going to have to divide, just by talking it out with them sometimes helps them to be able to find those key words and phrases, because it's not that they look at the word problem and they have no idea how to do the math. They know how to do the math part of it. They're just not sure of what do I need to do with this problem. So those cues just to help them to what they need, what parts they need to do. And we'll even go in, and when my son is telling me I need to divide, and I'll take the highlighter even and highlight those key words for him. So then he can look back on it and he remembers to look at those key words, and that reminds him of what he needs to do with that problem.
One of the things I think that is really important, and Michael framed this very well. Michael, you framed it by talking about how to remember to spell the word why, and having that observation of that's a tough word and here's how it's spelled. Now there's a paradigm, there's a framework to be able to put that into. And often I think when kids struggle with word problems, they struggle because they're anxious already, and then they start looking for the numbers and they forget to do exactly what Kathleen has explained, which is find what is being asked of you first before you even worry about the numbers. Michael, I know you have talked about this as well with your boys as far as laying a good foundation with word problems. And your youngest isn't fully reading yet. So when you encounter word problems, how do you help him understand those with a not yet fluid reading capacity?
absolutely. Can you hear me okay, Gretchen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. My sound went a little funny on me. So, yeah, so my youngest can't read, and my oldest can now. But what I will typically do is read the word problem to them. And what I will do then is ask them various questions about the word problem. Just in a simple sense, it could be something like Mary had 8 apples and Stephen came by and took 2. How many are left? I will ask the question, what numbers do you hear in this word problem? And they'll say, okay, the number 8. Okay, what does the 8 represent? Mary's apples. Great, let's take out the 8 block to represent those. Okay, what other number do you hear? The number 2. And what's it saying with the number 2? How many apples Stephen took. Okay, if we take apples, what are we doing? Are we adding or subtracting? We're subtracting. Great. So let's take 2 of those apples away. Do you remember how we flipped the blocks over to show we're subtracting? Let's take 8 minus 2. What number's left? We have 6. And so we kind of walk through it together. And one of the things I've done also is I've developed a chart that has various addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division phrases on there. So left means we're subtracting. All together means we're adding. How many groups might mean we're multiplying? Doing those type of things so that they can be able to quickly identify what we're doing with those word problems. And so that way they can start to take more of it on their own. But using the blocks to help identify those objects, sometimes it can be overwhelming to read that whole thing and be like, okay, there's a lot of numbers in there. There's a lot going on. And I know sometimes when you have very creative, artistic students, you can get lost in the weeds with that, where you start thinking about what type of apples are in Mary's basket. Are they Red Delicious? Are they Honeycrisp? What kind of basket is she holding? Is it a wicker basket? You know, all of these type of things where our brain gets moved away from what we're trying to do. And so by being able to break it down like this, it helps the student know what to look for and how to solve these type of problems.
Right. Several parents had mentioned what are the tips and the tricks of being able to help my child know how to solve a word problem. Solving word problems is a learned skill. It does take time. But just like Michael explained about building a chart of words, if you have a student who is 4th grade and above, I would encourage you to have them build the chart, because you can do all the fancy charts and, you know, Pinterest, scrapbooking presented formats, but it's not going to help children be able to understand successfully what they're doing if they don't do it themselves. By the same token, I had a parent who said, you know, I made a whole bunch of note cards for my children and it didn't work really well. And I said, you made the note cards or they made the note cards? The difference there is they're making the note cards, so they're developing what they need to have as far as information to help them retain that information. We're just at the bottom of the hour now, so I would like to turn my attention to the questions that we were asked. There were some really creative questions here, and what I did is I went through and I looked at these questions that are on my other monitor here and wanted to come back to kind of some groups of questions. So I've looked at them and sort of organized them a little bit. And I'm going to throw this open to the two of you and let you all answer it. Thoughts on older children who struggle with mastery and struggle being able to move forward. Can you guys talk a little bit about what might be the root causes of that? And how do we help a child who has a learning challenge feel like they are mastering mathematics successfully?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think the number one thing when you're switching to math you see is placement is probably the most critical aspect of it. You're going to notice we're not grade level specific, we're skill specific. And so when you look at seeing alpha, beta, gamma, delta, et cetera, that doesn't mean first, second, third, fourth grade. It means we have to, math builds upon itself. So we need to master the skill in front of us to be successful with skills later on. And so a lot of times it's no fault to the student. It's more that they just didn't have enough practice with certain skills and the curriculum moved on too quickly. That's why we believe mastery is the best approach, because the student dictates how long they stay there and not the curriculum. We're not giving you just 5 problems and moving on regardless if you have it or not. We're allowing the student to take the time they need to learn that concept well and move on. You as a parent have the ability to know when it's time to move on, when it's time to take a break, and when you need to stay there. I think that's the most important piece. When we look at placement, we may find, for instance, if we're in Algebra 1, that we are struggling with fractions. We never really got a good grasp of fractions. And we find that Algebra 1 is very fraction heavy. And without that, without those concepts down well, it's gonna be tough to do Algebra 1. And so we're not interested in starting your student over. We're only interested in helping them where they need that extra practice and working only in those skills. So what we're gonna do is just maybe work in the fraction level, work our way through that, reevaluate, and if there aren't any other gaps before Algebra 1, we're just gonna go ahead and jump back to Algebra 1. And so that's kind of how we look at it, is that if we just put them into Algebra 1 thinking a change of curriculum is going to help, lots of times that's not the case. Lots of times there's other factors that are causing the struggles. And you know, it may be a more fun curriculum, it may be something different, but ultimately, unless we address those gaps, that trouble is not going to go away. Those gaps are only going to increase. And so that would be what we do. So if you're having some thoughts of, wonder if my student has gaps, we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to double check that with some different tools we can do. And we're not interested in just selling you a bunch of curriculum. We're interested in helping your child find those gaps and addressing only those things. And so we'd be happy to talk to you about that.
Kathleen, can you talk a little bit about how we have been able to help kids who are older, who are struggling using the principles of AIM?
Right. I was thinking AIM specifically. One of the things that we have realized that we have come to through research is that when children are getting into those upper levels, like Algebra 1, it is not the algebra concepts that are so difficult for them that they can't understand. How do I figure out what's the missing number here? And research has shown that it's not the algebra concept, it's the fact that that problem requires 6, 7 steps. That child is shutting down because they're looking at those 6 to 7 steps and they're thinking, okay, every step is going to be hard for me, because they're struggling, because they don't have their basic facts memorized. So because of that, that problem right away is a challenge for them. That problem is something that they're looking at and they're struggling with before they even start. When they go back and memorize those math facts, when they use something like AIM to make sure that they have those facts solid, then they can jump ahead and go into those upper levels, and they have the confidence now because they have in their long-term memory those facts and they can just pull them. So now the basic adding, subtracting, multiplying that's done in the algebra problem is no longer difficult for them. Those facts are right there, and they can just jump into figuring out the missing part of that problem in algebra. And it's a game changer for them.
I think one of the other things that's important to make an observation about is I'm the parent of 2 dyslexic children. And we, as the parents of dyslexics, have been told that dyslexic kids can't memorize. And that's not really true. If that were really the case, there would be nothing for which our children could not wax eloquent. And any of you who are the parent of a boy know that there's something your son is really excited about and can talk to you about ad nauseum. And if that's the case, then there is the ability for your child to memorize facts. Now, I want to make an observation for parents. Often, and we did this in Math UC, when we teach a fact, we present a fact horizontally. So I have 3 + 5 = 8. When we present that fact horizontally, we're requiring the student to move from one side of their corpus callosum to the other. And if a child has a dyslexia, that is a hard process. Sometimes fact memorizing is just simply as easy as taking that fact and writing it vertically. 3 + 5 = 8. This was one of the things that came really apparent when we developed the AIM program. So one of the things that is inherent to AIM is to ask the student to identify which way they see the fact more readily. And if it's vertical, allow your student to build those facts vertically. Now, in alpha, in beta, we do the facts and we present them horizontally. And Steve Demme did an amazing job of creating this system that allowed us to use manipulatives to illustrate mathematical concepts. but it's also important for us to work in cooperation with the neurology of learning. So don't be fed a myth that says my child can't memorize anything because they have a learning challenge. Instead, work with your student to be able to work around that. And if you have questions about that, and if you would like some help with regard to that, we have a whole cadre of people here at Demme Learning who would be happy to help you analyze that, figure out what would make it a more profitable experience for your child. Maybe they won't get to 100% fact mastery, but the difference between 75% fact mastery and 80% fact mastery can be the difference between an A and a B by the time they get to Algebra 1. So it's definitely worth fighting that good fight and hanging in there. Michael, when should a child know his math facts or her math facts? What do we say at MathUC as far as knowing their facts?
Sure. I think what you're getting at is you are where you are academically, and we don't believe you're ahead or behind. You know what you know, and that's where we are. One of the great things about math, I think, is that not everybody has to get through calculus. Not everybody has to get through 12th grade. A lot of times we put a lot of pressure on kids in math between the ages of kindergarten and 6th, 7th grade, because you have to go with your class. And what happens though, as you get toward the later junior high, high school ages, is kids go based upon where they want to go after high school's over. And so sometimes you only have to get through Algebra 2. Sometimes that's as far as you need to go. So you have some freshmen taking pre-algebra, Algebra 1, geometry classes. They're all over the map, and it's okay. So there's 2 years of grace there. That's what I look at. And if you are a student in 4th or 5th grade and you don't have their facts memorized, what we find is if you don't memorize them after 1st grade, they're never going to become memorized unless you take a break to work on them. Because typically what happens is the teacher is working on getting you through 1st grade, working on your addition and subtraction facts. And if you don't have them memorized by then, you have to come up with a strategy. It might be a number line. It might be counting on your fingers. It might be drawing circles or tally marks on your page. But what happens is kids compensate at that point, and then they move on to 2nd grade. And so I've never found a student yet that has memorized them on the fly. Typically, there has to be a break. And so the reason AIM got developed is because we have found that students later on, like Kathleen said, struggling in math, because what happens is if I have a bigger problem in front of me and I'm working on it, and I get to a problem, maybe it's 18 plus 14, I go 8 plus 4, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now I have to remember where I left off. I have to remember what my number was, write it down, carry 10, and then I go, okay, 10, 2, 3. So now it's 32. I just want to spend a lot more time in my head trying to grasp that. And what's going to happen is I'm going to get lost. I'm going to forget steps. I'm going to overcount. I'm going to undercount. Some of those things are going to take place. And so we recognize, even though you have a 4th grader, they're not necessarily going to be, they're not a 1st grader. We know that. But there are some things they haven't picked up in 1st grade. And so this is really designed to get rid of the habit of counting. We're not going to teach them what is addition and subtraction. We're not bringing them back to 1st grade. We're going to meet them where they're at and what they know and understand. And that's what the AIM program is designed to do, is take a break, work on your facts, then we can reevaluate, because a lot of times we see with students, once those facts get memorized, other gaps naturally fill in all the way or partially. And so we can, at that point, find that next step for them and get them back to where they left off academically.
Absolutely. Kathleen, one of the things that parents have said here a couple of different times is, what do you do with a child who demonstrates mastery? Okay, so you're showing me you understand, but now we've moved on 5 or 6 lessons, and in a review page, here is that same problem again, and it seems as though mastery has been lost. How do we as parents make sure that in MathUC's review process, our child maintains that process?
And I have personally gone through that. With my youngest son, I would see exactly that. He usually did very well with each lesson, watching the video and then doing his lesson pages. But then sometimes in the systematic review pages, he would forget something. And what I would usually do is first I would ask him, I would say, okay, well, what are you trying to do here? And do you remember? And just to see if it was, did he just carry the number wrong? Did he just make a simple mistake? But there were times that I realized that he was, I don't necessarily think it was forgetting, but he was maybe misunderstanding a concept, or at times he would confuse one concept with another concept. So what I would just go back, and we'd rewatch the video, or I'd get the instruction manual out and just look at that lesson and say, okay, do you remember? And then he'd say, oh, okay. And again, for him, it was sometimes he would confuse one concept with another. And he'd say, well, I thought I was supposed to use the rule of 4 here, or I thought, and then once it became clear to him, then he would be able to move forward. So at times he just needed a little reminder, and we just did that. And then it would click, and he would be able to then do his problems and move forward.
I think that knowing the ability to coach your student and be able to ask them questions is probably one of the most valuable things that we can present to a parent. And in that process, I want to also make the observation that in mathematics, your learning happens in the problems you get wrong, not in the problems you get right. Because if we're getting problems right out of the gate, that's terrific. But I think sometimes we as homeschool moms forget the value in revisiting the problems where the errors occur, and having our students apply themselves to find those errors and make right what has been wrong is sometimes the most valuable investment of your time. And it's much more valuable for you to be able to find those errors and teach them in the early part of that week. I know some of us get really busy, particularly when we have lots of kids at home, and we think, oh, I'll just take Thursday night and I'll check everybody's work, and then on Friday. But that in the moment, being able to check the work and make sure day by day that the work is being done accurately, how discouraging is it if you spend all week long working on what you think you understand, and then you find out at the end of the week, when you've gone through 3, 4, 5 pages, that you don't understand. It's much easier to take it in small increments and have you as the parent guide your student forward successfully. Shantae asks a question. She says, and forgive me if I mispronounced your name, I will apologize for that in advance. I'm going to do the best I can. It says, so you would go back to a problem from a previous book, for instance, pre-algebra from Epsilon? Absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes, for instance, often in pre-algebra, you will see in the review pages Epsilon concepts. And if my student really doesn't, with my careful coaching, understand that, then I'll step back into Epsilon and we'll go through that problem again. Right, Kathleen? One of the things I think that's important that we as parents sometimes miss is beginning in pre-algebra, we have, come on, look, come out. We have these review pages that are called quick reviews, and they're in gray. And they are in pre-algebra and algebra 1 in particular. They are sometimes in earlier lessons, but you'll find them frequently in pre-algebra and algebra 1. And I had a conversation with a parent a couple of weeks ago who said, oh, we just skipped those because we're trying to move forward mathematically. But they're placed strategically for a reason, and they're there to help you with what we know is going to be a foundational concept your student needs to have mastery of. So use I think it was you, Michael, who said use the materials as a tool, use them to your best advantage, and make sure that you're using those tools available to you successfully. Shantae, that's a great question. And I thank you for asking it. Anybody else have any questions for us? Please don't hesitate to put them in the chat or unmute your mic. We're happy to answer them.
Gretchen, I just wanted to mention also that if you look in the back of the instruction manual in the master index, That's where you can find where a topic is taught, what level it was taught at, and I believe it even says which lesson. So if you're wondering, okay, my child's forgetting this concept, how do I know where to find it? It's right in the master index in the back of the instruction manual.
So for instance, if I had a child in pre-algebra who was struggling in understanding area, this would tell me exactly where we would need to go within the lessons to find that, to review that. So I think that's a good observation, and that's an important thing for people to remember, is use the tools that are available to you. I know as a homeschool mom, it was easy for me to put too much of the burden to being responsible on my children. And my kids were all very different. I had to have 6 kids before I had a child who could really take control of their academic experience on their own before the very latest part of middle school, if not high school. The rest of my children, they needed me to be there and hatch them like an egg so that they could stay on task. And I think that makes a tremendous amount of difference. All right, you guys, let me throw another question out here. Can both of you talk a little bit about traits that would reflect mastery? Parents, I've got 3 parents who've asked, what does it look like? What kind of traits will my student exhibit when we know that they have mastered something?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to memorization of facts, one of the things you're going to be looking for is like, if you have, especially the +2s, if you have 6 + 2, it's very easy to count 6, 7, 8, right? And get to the answer very quickly. We look at memorization as being able to give an answer in 3 seconds or less without counting. And so what I look for is, you know, a lot of times when we grew up, we had flashcards. I'd put a flashcard up and my son would be across the table from me or across the room. And I'd be going, okay, 6 + 2. And he'd go, I'm not sure. And then say 8. And I'd be like, okay, buddy, do we count those memorized or not? You know, because one of the things we look for is if he's counting. So if they can say the full fact to 6 + 2 = 8 without hesitation, you know they have it, because they're having to say the full fact back and not being able to have time to count in between there. So I always look for, are they looking at the ceiling? Are their fingers moving? Are their lips moving in between there? Those type of things to make sure it's memorized. When it comes to those bigger problems, I let parents know that you know your child best, but what we look for is that they're not looking for help, that they're understanding those steps, are able to explain it to the best of their ability, and that they are able to use the blocks where they're building it, they're writing it, they're saying it. And so if they're not able to explain why they're doing something or understand what they're doing there, the blocks are an important piece of that, because they're going to show you exactly how to walk through a problem or why they're doing the steps the way that they are. It gives you that deeper understanding. And so I look for that with my kids, is are they getting it? Are they looking for help? Are they counting? All of those type of things. And it doesn't hurt to do one more day of practice. Don't feel like you have to be done after 1 or 2 days or even 3 days. If one more day of work will benefit your student, take that 1 extra day and do it, or take 3 or 4 hours off and come back in the afternoon and try a little bit more just to give them that extra practice. I think that's one of the things with homeschooling as parents is we want to get them done. You know, our goal is to get done with the book, and how quickly can we get there? And I don't want my kids to be bored and all of these things come in mind, but what could be best for my student? Maybe it's to do 1 more day's worth of work to really solidify that. And I think that's something to consider, and know when it's time to move on and when it's time to keep going. So.
Kathleen, do you have something to add to that?
I do. And I think this is, again, that you know your child and every child is different. Again, for my older child, where he was doing all of the worksheets and then he could tell me how he came up with the answers, I knew that he was mastering it just from that. My youngest child, you know, just handing him worksheet after worksheet didn't work for him. I had to find other avenues. I remember when he was little, he had these huge cardboard blocks that he loved to play with. He played with those blocks for years and for hours every day. And when he was learning addition, we would do things like say to him, okay, build a bridge, but make it so that it's the same on both sides. He had to count. He had to figure out how to make it the same on both sides. And we'd even say to him, well, what if we took 2 away? He was learning, or he was even showing us how he learned his math facts through play without having a worksheet, but just by observing how he was playing and having conversations with him. I was able to see that he was understanding addition, that he was understanding subtraction. And I was even able to throw in some facts in there without him knowing, hey, mom's giving you a little test here. But I was able to see that he was mastering it just from playing with him and interacting with him and doing it that way.
Sure. I wonder, Kathleen, if you could also talk a little bit about that that larger concept of a student mastery checklist, what we had discussed this morning in chat, because I think here is a good place for its application, because this takes it beyond the realm of just mathematics.
Right. So I think there are 3 parts of a mastery checklist: observation, informal conversation, and projects. So again, through observation, you're watching you're watching how your child is arriving at the math facts. You're watching their body language. Like Michael said, you're watching, are they looking up at the ceiling and counting? Are they counting on their fingers, or do they just have the facts mastered? Are they right there? And then informal conversations. Again, I just gave an example of how I use that with my son, to just during play or during other things, does he understand it? Has he mastered it just through that? And then the third one is projects. And again, that's especially, with young kids who love to just play act and make things and, build things, and they're constantly moving about. You can just see it through that. If your child has to care for an animal, maybe they have to build a pen for them, or something like that, and they have to make sure that the animal is fed and watered every day. These are all things that have they mastered the concept of quantities, of how much food, or how big do I need the pen for this size animal, and just those different kinds of things. Or if they're making a kite, if they're building a kite, that's another way. That's a great way to see, do they understand what equal is? And do they understand about making it bigger? And what do I need to add to it if I want it bigger on this side, but smaller on this side? Those are all ways of just, you're constantly seeing that they're mastering what they're being taught.
One of the things that several parents have said is that they feel like their student should be more mathematically independent. And I wonder if each of you would talk briefly in this, probably the last question that I have to pose to you, of what does independence look like mathematically for a student, and how do you get there?
Yeah, when you look into our instructor's guide, we lay out our 4 steps to mastery. It's under the how-to section. Then this can be shifted a little bit as they get older and as they gain independence, and as you know, that's what your student's looking for. The biggest thing is we do want, the videos are actually made for you as a parent to watch. It's one of the misconceptions about math you see. Most think it's for the student to watch. We recommend watching it with your student, but you definitely need to be watching it so you know what they're going to be working on and how the manipulatives work. And so we'll do that together. For the younger kids, we recommend you taking time to teach them how to do it so they can watch it, be able to understand it before they jump in. Their student's going to do just 1 page of practice a day. And I know a lot of parents who come from other curriculums will look at that and say, I'm used to doing an hour of math a day. You're not going to find that from us. We're going to look at it and see, depending on the age of your student, 15 minutes to a half an hour, because we recognize that's about the amount of focus the student has. We don't want to overwhelm. We want to master. We don't want to overwhelm. And so the goal, regardless of the age of your student, they can take into their own hands. My colleague Sue Wachter had a great point, and she said, I will tell my kids at that age that they have to teach the concept to me. They can do it. However, they need to learn best. If they want to take time to read the teacher's guide, if they want to use the answer key to find the solution so they can figure out how they got to that solution, they can do that. But the biggest thing is they need to understand it well enough to teach the concept back to me. So as your students gain, grow in age, grow in independence, you can find that, because it's important to teach them how to learn, how they can understand things as they get toward college age, that they know to take notes and study. That's a big part of growing up. And so I encourage that, to help them with that independence. But you still need to be involved, because like I said, math builds upon itself. And there are 3 reasons why we see Math UC not working. And one is placement. We talked about placement already. Number 2 is we don't use all the materials. We're not using the manipulatives. We're not using the test booklet. We're not using the instructor's guide DVD, whatever. And thirdly, we start saying, well, you have it down good enough, because pretty soon good enough catches up with you. And so as long as you are knowing that they're getting it, they're teaching it back to you, and they're moving at the based upon when they're getting it, that's what we're looking for with this curriculum. And so the goal does not change no matter the age of your student. It's always teaching the concept back to you.
Kathleen?
Yes, I agree with all of that Michael said. And I would say this comes back to a little bit of trust the process and know your child for me. Again, with my oldest child, I remember when he went through multiplication, I taught him the way the video, suggested, and that there's different ways to do it. And he would put the numbers up on top. He was carrying his numbers up on top. And that's the way I always grew up doing it. So I did it too. With my youngest son, that he didn't like that way. That didn't make sense. He wanted to put the numbers on the bottom the way Mr. Demme showed him. So I myself retaught myself how to put the numbers on the bottom. And that was many years ago. And yet I still do it that way, because what I realized was that made more sense to me too. So that's part of that trust the process, that each child is going to master it a little bit differently, but allow them to tell you what makes more sense to them, what works better for them. And then trust that they can move forward that way. And again, as Michael said, don't worry about what grade they're in, what year, where they are. You just keep moving forward from one lesson to the next.
I will tell you also that it is probably important to recognize that every one of your children is different. My eldest son couldn't work a math problem by himself until he was probably close to 17 years old. And that he had no learning challenges whatsoever. He was just that easily distracted. It was kind of like educating Mr. Magoo. But when that prefrontal cortex finally got developed, he went off to college and did 4 years of college in 3 years. Started his own business, paid his own way through college. So I think he was pretty successful. But if you'd have told me he was going to be successful at 15, when I still couldn't leave him for 5 minutes by himself, I wouldn't have believed that. His younger brother was fully independent mathematically by the time he was 11 years old. So every child is different. And I want to encourage you that comparison is the thief of joy, as our colleague Amanda Capps says. Don't compare your kids either, because it will steal your joy, and that will make it much harder. We're already at the top of the hour. I can't believe it's gone so quickly. Ladies first, Kathleen, what closing words do you have for our families today?
I think I just want to say to just remember that your children are individual and trust the process. Just let your child go at the pace that they need to go at.
Michael?
We threw a lot at you. There's a lot of things to take from this, I think. And so if there's anything you want to discuss individually about your student, we're here for you. We don't just say that, we truly want to help. That's why we're all here. Most of us, if not all of us, have used the curriculum as a student or for our kids. And so we're more than happy to help discuss, placement, to make sure that, we have strategies in place for your kids. So please keep that in mind. We want to help any way that we can.
We have a colleague, Sue Wachter, who says if anybody's in tears, whether it's you or your student, it's time to pick up the phone and give us a call. And we would love for you to be able to do that. If you would like to speak to one of us individually, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our goal is to see that, as I said in the beginning, you have a joyful journey. And we want to be able to make that happen. Thank you for trusting us with this time. If there are further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to spend some individual time with you and make sure that you have everything you need for a successful Math-UC experience. Thanks, everybody. We wish you the joy of the journey, and we'll look forward to your joining us again soon. Take care.